it. I'm going to pause the recording, but I got
what Christians down through the ages or the centuries have thought about this matter. And I'm going to approach this by focusing on 6 different, what I call models of heaven. Maybe you would just say ideas of heaven, each of which has biblical roots. I also, when we're done looking at these 6 models, I want to talk about the sources of these models. That is, where do they come from? Do people just sit around campfires and say, well, wouldn't it be great if once we're dead, this were true? And then they just somehow turn this into doctrine or dogma. That is, they just make things up. I don't think that's how this works, as you'll see in a little bit. But with that as the introduction, Mike, if you could give us the very first picture. So this is the first picture or model or idea of heaven or the afterlife. Now, this is what we call paradise. And strangely enough, the word paradise occurs in the Bible in Hebrew. And the Israelites actually borrowed the word from the Persians. So this is an old ancient word. And originally it just means garden. And in Jewish thought, already in the Bible, this word gets applied to the Garden of Eden. So the Garden of Eden was a paradise. And why would anyone think of heaven as a beautiful garden or as paradise? Well, the first answer to this question is because Jesus said so. So let me read you a little passage from the Gospel of Luke. This is from Luke 23, and this passage occurs only in Luke. It's not in Matthew, Mark, or John, just Luke. So one of the criminals hanging beside Jesus railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this person has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he, that is Jesus, said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." So here's one of those texts where we're thinking about what happens after death, and the word paradise is used, and it's used by Jesus himself. Now, there are other relevant texts. Here's a text from Paul. This is from 2 Corinthians. "I know a man in Christ," he's talking about himself, "who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven," whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know, God knows. "And I know that this man was caught up into paradise." So Paul has had some sort of mystical rapture, and he's been to another world or another reality or another plane of existence, and he calls it paradise. So this has left readers with the idea that not only was there a paradise on earth, not only was there a Garden of Eden, but there's something like it or analogous to it in the present, somehow in another realm or world. Maybe Paul thought literally way up there somewhere. Anyway, it still exists. There's still an Eden. And Paul was able, at least for a little bit of time, he thinks, to go there. Now, we also have the book of Revelation. And listen to this. This is from the last chapter of Revelation, last chapter in the New Testament. And the seer, John, the visionary, the prophet, is having this great vision. "Then he showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also, on either side of the river, the tree of life, yielding its fruits each month." So you know about the tree of life. It's back there in Genesis. And here is a seer looking into the future, seeing what lies beyond. and the tree comes back. So again, this gives you this sense of, oh, we're going to be back in the Garden of Eden somehow. There's also one other passage I would like to read here. This is from the book of Isaiah. So we're leaving the New Testament, going back to the book of Isaiah. And here Isaiah, an Old Testament prophet, is imagining the future. And this is what he says: the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall feed, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The suckling child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. What this is it's a return to paradise, to the Garden of Eden, to the time when, in the Jewish imagination, all the animals were tame and they were in the Garden of Eden and they got along with Adam and Eve. It was only later, after the so-called fall, that nature became cruel and animals began to eat each other and be a threat to human beings and so on. So when Isaiah is looking into the future, he is seeing a restored paradise. Now, I think this makes sense from a theological point of view. What it's saying is that the end will be like the beginning. If you want to imagine the end, then think of how it was at the beginning, before the so-called fall, before sin entered the world, when God's will was done on earth as in heaven. This makes sense. So the basic idea here is that we will be back in the garden. Okay, Mike, let's go on to number 2. This is a scene from an old movie most of you know. Yeah, there we go. So that's a scene, as I hope most of you know, from an old movie from 1946 called It's a Wonderful Life, which comes on television still every year during the holiday season. Now, the guy on the left is named Clarence Oddbody. And Clarence Oddbody calls himself an angel second class. And what he is he's a dead guy who's trying to get his wings. Now, this is popular culture. This is popular Christian culture in North America, still in our time, and throughout Europe in our time. This guy is like a guardian angel, but he's a dead human who is trying to become an angel, and he does at the very end of the show. Now, you can trace this idea that dead human beings become angels or like angels throughout all sorts of popular literature. Maybe a few of you remember a Hans Christian Andersen story called The Angel. And in this, a little boy is being carried to heaven by an angel, and he learns that the angel who is carrying him to heaven used to be a poor sick boy who had crutches. So it's the same idea that you have in A Wonderful Life. You even have this in an old pop song that I do not like very much. I hope I don't insult anybody here, but there was a song in the 1960s that made it actually to #1 on the charts back then. They used to have the Billboard Hot 100 way back in the day. Anyway, this is called Teen Angel, and it's about a boyfriend who's talking about his girlfriend who's just been flattened by a train. So he says, "Teen Angel, can you see me? Are you up there, up above? Am I still your own true love?" Well, maybe that's too old and you don't remember the song. Maybe more of you remember a TV show from the 1980s starring Michael Landon, who was wildly popular back in the day, called Highway to Heaven. And in this, Michael Landon tries to earn his wings, that is, tries to become an angel by helping human beings, very much like It's a Wonderful Life. Now, this is all entertainment. This is Hollywood and popular music, but people take it seriously according to everything I can discover. There are some websites, very heartbreaking websites in which people remember their dead children, little ones who have died before their time. And one of the sites is called Remembering Our Angels, and another is called Cherish Angels. And it turns out that this is a very popular way of speaking about dead people. And in fact, I read one British sociologist who said that in Britain today, it's far more common to speak of angels than souls with reference to the departed or the dead. Now, where on earth did this idea come from? Well, again, it's the Bible, and again, it's Jesus. There's a passage in the Gospel of Mark where the Sadducees come to Jesus and they say, there's no resurrection of the dead. This can't be the case. Tell us, teacher. Moses wrote that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but leaves no child, the man must take the wife and raise up children for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, and when he died, left no children. And the second took her and died, leaving no children. And the third likewise. And the 7 left no children. Last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection, whose wife shall she be? For the 7 all had her as wife. Jesus said to them, you are wrong. You know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but here we go, are like angels in heaven. Now, this is a bit enigmatic, and if you read the commentators, the experts, they disagree exactly about what this means. Are we going to be like angels in one way or several ways? In all ways, will we morph into a new species? But anyway, this is where you get the idea that when you die, you will become like the angels or an angel. By the way, this doesn't sound boring to me. This sounds rather interesting. Maybe the notion that our natures aren't fixed and that we will change or evolve into something that we are not now. I like this idea. I think it's really interesting. Okay, Mike, let's go on to number 3. Okay, I love this image. Now, what the heck is it? So this is an icon. This is an icon of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they are holding little people. They are holding little people, and this is a very maternal image. These are 3 old men, but the image is very maternal, and I like it very much. And it's a bit like, if you know anything about Eastern Orthodox or Roman Catholic icons, those icons of Mary, where she has her arms like this, and she's holding Jesus. Okay, so what is this about and where does it come from? Well, it's a way of depicting the departed saints, the dead saints, as members of a family. The little people being held are the saints. And this icon grows out of a parable of Jesus, because in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, Jesus says that the poor man died and the angels took him to Abraham's bosom. They took him to Abraham's bosom. And what we have here, the guy in the middle is Abraham, and he's holding a bunch of people, and they are in Abraham's bosom. And what happens in Christian tradition is Abraham becomes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they all are holding the saints at their breasts or their bosoms. So the idea here is that heaven is being with the ancestors. The sons and daughters of Abraham will be with Abraham. By the way, this lines up with a really interesting Old Testament expression that so-and-so was buried and was gathered to his fathers. Maybe if you know the Bible well, you remember that phrase. It's used of several so-called patriarchs and sainted people in the Hebrew Bible. But what's so interesting about it is some of these people are not buried in their family burial graves. That is, they are put in a cave, but it's not a cave with their ancestors, but they're being gathered to their ancestors. And I think the best explanation of this is that in the underworld, or wherever it is they're going upon death, they're going to be gathered back with their relatives. This is a very popular belief, and I would guess when people think about heaven today, this might be what they think about first and foremost. This might be the most important part of heaven for them. Maybe you remember the old hymn, in the sweet by and by. Uh, in the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. So the afterlife heaven is a reunion of friends and family. It's the same thing in Blessed Be the Ties, the tie that binds. If you go down to the end of that, when we asunder part, it gives us inward pain, but we shall still be joined in heart and hope to meet again. This glorious hope revives our courage by the way, while each in expectation lives and longs to see the day. From sorrow, toil, and pain and sin we shall be free, and perfect love and friendship reign through all eternity. So here it is again. This is our family reunion, our coming back together. And by the way, I can't imagine anything more wonderful myself. I frequently think of my dead loved ones, and when I think of the afterlife, this is probably number one for me. I want to see my father. I want to see my friend Barbara. I want to see my paternal grandmother. I long to see these people again. And I hope I'm not just being sentimental. We are all socially formed, as you know it. We're not individuals. I don't even know who I am without my family and friends and my social location and context and so on. I don't know how I would continue to live without some sort of human social context and interaction. Anyway, who else are you going to meet there? So your relatives and maybe your friends and so on. Mike, how about the next one? Up. Okay, so that's supposed to be a picture of Jesus, and he's hugging somebody, and he's welcoming him to heaven. So who's going to be in heaven? Well, the answer is, for the Christian, Jesus. And this goes back to the same passage I started with, the passage from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus is dying on the cross. Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Well, you can focus on the paradise part, but our tradition has also paid attention to the with me part. So what is heaven? Heaven is finding Jesus again. These models obviously aren't antagonistic, they're complementary. Now, again, there's a strong scriptural basis for this, not only the passage in Luke, but in Philippians. Paul knows that he might not be here in this world much longer. And he says his desire is to depart and be with Christ. He's talking about death. So how is he conceptualizing death? He's conceptualizing it as being with Christ. There's also the passage in John 14, which is usually read at funerals. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. This is also an idea that's all over our hymns. My wife, I didn't sing this one growing up, but my wife tells me that she sang every Sunday a song called Beulah Land. My Savior comes and walks with me in sweet communion. Here have we. He gently leads me by his hand, for this is heaven's borderland. So when you die and you approach heaven, Jesus comes and meets you. My wife's old Baptist church always met on Sunday evenings, and there was a sing-along, a sing time, a hymn time, and she says somebody always requested this one every Sunday. Okay, Mike, let's go on to number 5. Okay, now of the pictures, this is actually my least favorite. But it's supposed to represent heaven as a place of worship. By the way, this also incidentally represents heaven as a place where people become angels, because look, they all have wings. So this goes back to the angelic mutation idea. Anyway, I was in a Sunday school class once, not in Mike's church, but another church, and I guess I was observing one or more of my children. I can't remember why, but they were singing a song called Father Abraham, and they were all jumping up and down. And I don't think I'd heard this song before. It didn't really grab me. And the leader of this was jumping up and down, and she was ecstatic. And she was saying, "Oh, this is just what heaven's going to be like, you know, singing and worshiping God and so on." And I remember thinking, heaven as an eternal youth rally really sounds more like hell to me. I'd be much happier at a rock concert if it were the right band. Anyway, where does this idea come from? Well, this comes from several ideas in the Bible. The Bible depicts heaven as a place where God is worshiped. This happens in Isaiah 6, where the prophet is called, and he has a vision of the Lord sitting on the throne, and then he sees the seraphim, and they call out to one another, "Holy, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." You have the same sort of scene in Revelation 4, where the Lamb and God are worshipped. So this is in the Bible. It's also all over our hymns. There's an old hymn called "Holy, Holy, Holy, Lord God Almighty." Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, early in the morning our song shall rise to thee. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty God in three persons, blessed Trinity. Holy, 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 all the saints adore thee. All the saints, this includes the dead saints, casting down their golden crowns around the glassy sea. That's from the passage in Revelation that I just referred to. Cherubim and seraphim falling down before thee, which wert and art and evermore shall be. If church thrills you, or if there are moments in church that thrills you, this is understandable. You can relate to heaven as a place of worship, maybe something a little bit like a church service, or a church service at its very best. If church doesn't thrill you, this probably won't either. Okay, Mike, let's do the last slide. Okay, that is heaven conceptualized as a city or the New Jerusalem. Now, this one is hard for me. It's really hard for me because when I imagine the future, I don't want the New Jerusalem. I want the new Maine. I want the ocean and the forest and the mountains. I don't want another city. I live in Princeton, and I can get on the train and be in Manhattan sometimes with the express train in an hour. And when I get off the train, I just hate it. But I have to admit, this is just subjective. My daughter loves New York City. She loves Manhattan. She loves walking around. She feels alive there. I had a friend once, and we spent the whole day walking around Manhattan. And introvert that I am, I found it all scary, but he was just delighted. He loved the old men playing chess in the park. He loved the little shops. He loved the people walking their dogs. He loved all the hustle and bustle. He loved the people playing their guitars for money on the sidewalk. He loved it all. Anyway, in the Bible, heaven is sometimes thought of, or the future or the world to come, as the New Jerusalem. And this is how the Bible actually ends, with the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. Paul also, in the book of Galatians, speaks of a Jerusalem in the heavens. So these ancient Jews not only thought of Jerusalem, the terrestrial city, but they also had a conception that there was some sort of corresponding reality in heaven, in the other world, in the transcendent reality. This is also referred to in the book of Hebrews. You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering. Now, as I said, I find it hard. I really do. I find it hard to relate to this because I just want to go to the new Maine. I want a natural landscape. But I do think I understand, and I once read an article that changed my mind about this, or at least opened my mind to this. I read a wonderful article in which the author argued that New York City, of all places, is a sign of the kingdom of heaven. And what he said is this. He said, New York City is wonderful because it embodies universalism. It has people from all over the world and all walks of life. Everybody is there. And of course, that's like heaven. He also said New York is a place where all things are possible. People go there to chase their dreams. He said it's a place of hope. Many of them come because they want to escape their past or their country or persecution or their poverty in another place. They go there in hope of a better life. It's the place of immigrants, and it is a place that promises freedom. It's symbolized by the Statue of Liberty, which is about liberty and freedom. And this author said New York City is a place of magic. You never know what's going to happen. So he said, there you have it. New York City is universalism. It is freedom. It is hope. It is magic. And those all seem fittingly Christian to me. So having read that article, I can at least understand it. Maybe I don't feel it. I still want to go to Maine rather than New York, but maybe there's something to think about here. Okay, so the tour is over. The tour is over. And the question is, what do you make of this little tour? What do you make of these models? You can say, well, they're all in the Bible, so they're all true. Or you can say more cynically, well, it's just all imagination. Nobody knows anything. Now, I want to say two things here at the end. I want to say two things here at the end. The first may surprise you. I want to say that these imaginings are not unrelated to human experience. These models of heaven have been reinforced by human experience, and I'd contend that they partly originated in human experience. The second thing I want to say actually chimes up very nicely with the prayer that Pastor Mike started with today. I think imagination is one of our chief ways to God, one of our ways of interacting with the divine. So, first of all, what about heaven and human experience? That sounds like a weird proposition I just gave you, that what is going to come in the future is somehow related to what happens now. So let me go back to the beginning. I don't think people just sit around a campfire and say, hey, let's make up heaven, or let's make up hell. Wouldn't it be great if we could, torch our enemies or whatever? I believe that most doctrines are attempts to interpret human experience. Now, how can that be the case, let's say, with models of heaven? Well, think about it. Go back to the very first model, heaven as paradise, heaven as Eden regained. If you read these modern accounts of near-death experiences, and you might remember I talked about them briefly last week, and I argued that we should take them seriously, right? If you read them, they are full of sights of people reporting that they saw beautiful natural landscapes. So they're supposedly dead or leaving their bodies, and then they have these visionary experiences and they report these beautiful landscapes. So let me read a few of these to you. I was just in a wonderful peace and wellness in a beautiful landscape setting of grass, lawns, and trees and brilliant light, diffused, not coming from any central source, with a feeling of being surrounded by wonderful love, joy, and peace, no illness or pain. Here's another. I floated upward to a beautiful, vivid green field. Or there was the most beautiful garden filled with flowers, which were very beautiful. Or one more, inside was the most beautiful garden, no lawn, path or anything else, but flowers of every kind. Those that attracted me most were Madonna lilies, delphiniums, and roses, but there were many, many more. Now, I think there have always been reports like these, and you don't have to think they are veridical or objective or real to admit that they are subjectively real. And people come back and they say, you know, I was dead, and here's what I saw. And it was paradise. It was a garden. It was beautiful, and so on. So I don't think this idea just floats out of nowhere. I think that it's related to experience. Now, what about heaven as a place of reunion, of meeting again your relatives or close friends? Well, again, if you look at near-death experiences, they are filled with accounts of people going down the tunnel of light, and then at some point they run into their loved ones or their relatives or their friends. I think even more significant is the fact that deathbed visions, again, this is something I talked about last week, and you don't have to think that they are objectively real, but we know now that they are very common and that they are at least subjectively real. People in great numbers in the last days of their life see their dead relatives, and they always interpret this as the relatives coming for them, coming to guide them, to take them on their journey, on their movement from where they are now to where they are going. I know this has been a universal. This is attested in many, many, many times in different places. Seems to be a cross-cultural reality. So again, I think that model has something to do with human experience. People who are dying will say, oh, here's my father, here's my mother, here's my husband, here's my wife, come to take me. Or again, same thing with near-death experiences, meeting the relatives over there. Now you may say, okay, Allison, but what about this angel stuff? How can there be any connection between angels and or this idea that we might become angels? Well, the reason is that when people see the dead, it's not uncommon for them to see the dead as transformed, as transfigured into light. I think I mentioned last week that whatever you make of it, I'm convinced that I had a dead person wake me up 3 days after she had died. And she stood at the end of my bed and she was transfigured. She was glorious. She was beautiful. And you can actually find accounts of people having these visions of dead people, and they'll use the word angel because the person has been transformed. Here's just one account. My mother passed away last February 17th, a little after midnight. She was in California while I was in Wichita, Kansas. At 9:40 a.m., February 17th, I was sitting in my bedroom at my mirror, setting my hair, when the room was suddenly lighted with the strangest light, one I can't fully describe. I felt a rustle of wind across my shoulders and a faint sound as the brushing of bird wings. Then I looked in the mirror. My mother was standing behind my chair, the most beautiful angel you can imagine. There it is, somebody trying to describe this dead person that she has seen, and she says, the most beautiful angel. And this is not an atypical story, and actually apparitions like that are far more common than the transparent, wispy ghost that for some reason dominates popular entertainment. Now, I could go on. I think even this idea of heaven as a city is related to visionary experiences or things that people think happen to them when they die. Because if you go through, again, the near-death experience literature, you will find that people will sometimes describe a city or something like a city. I'm not going to read any of those accounts now, but I, I suppose I should add here that, it's hard for me to take these things literally, right? But the people themselves often know that what they're saying can't be taken literally. They will often say, well, it was like this, or I can't describe it literally, or it was ineffable. I can't put it into words, but it was like this, or it was as if I saw something. Um, So they're seeing things that aren't in this world, and they don't have the words and vocabulary for it. So as they perceive and as they remember, their minds are looking for analogies. They're thinking, what does this look like? What does this remind me of? And then they come back and we get the reports, and they'll say, well, I can't really put it into words. And then they'll describe a city, or then they'll describe a garden. So how literally you want to take these things is up for grab. I've often thought of an analogy that goes like this. Let's say you go to some part of the world where the people have no idea what NFL football is. No idea. Never seen a football game. Never seen a modern Western sporting event, and you sit them down in a football stadium. Let's say three. You put three of them down in a football stadium, and they sit there for 10 minutes of the game, and then you take them away and interview them and ask them what they saw. Well, they don't have a word for football. They don't have a word for quarterback. They don't have a word for 50-yard line. They don't have words for most of the things that are going on, and they don't have concepts for most of the things they've seen. So if you were to listen to what they were saying, you could not take it literally, and they'd be grasping for analogies from things that they already knew. So they'd do a very bad job of describing something that was totally real, but they didn't have the equipment for it. I often think maybe some of these, or a lot of these accounts of people coming back or having visions are in the same category. They're seeing things that they don't usually see and for which they have no vocabulary, and so they come up with analogies. Oh, it's a city, or like a city, or something like that. Okay, now here's the final thing I want to say today. I think that what I've talked about today involves, to a great extent, imagination. And then the question becomes, well, can you evaluate imagination? The first thing you have to do is say, even the Bible itself recognizes that we're stuck, I think, with imagination. Paul wrote, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of people conceived, God has prepared for those who love God. So we can't really conceive of the things that lie ahead. They are so different. They are transcendent. They're beyond the current reality. Or again, this is Paul once more. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. So Paul says, I don't understand lots of things. There are many things I don't know. I certainly can't see the whole. I also think Jesus is relevant here, because when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, his favorite means is the parable. He says, well, the kingdom of heaven is, and then he doesn't give you a literal description. He says, well, it's kind of like this. Maybe it's kind of like a banquet, for example. So Jesus himself is using imagination, is using stories to talk about the things to come. So we are left with imagination, and we just need to get used to it and own up to it. By the way, this is how we operate as Christians. When you conceive of God, you're using your imagination, aren't you? When you think of Jesus, you are using your imagination. If you ever think of the afterlife, you are using your imagination. To think about transcendent realities requires that you use your imagination, because you did not see God walking down Elm Street last Tuesday, so you can describe God in some prosaic, literal manner. So the way I think about this is there are two sorts of imagination with regard to our subjects. There is theologically informed imagination, and there's theologically uninformed imagination. So here's how this works, at least for me. So if you ask me, is heaven a place or a state of mind, I would say I don't know. If you ask me what it will be like precisely, I would say I don't know. If you ask me what will our spiritual bodies be like, I'd say I don't know. If you ask me, well, will we be in time or out of time? I don't know. But this doesn't mean you can't say anything. You can make theological statements, maybe not descriptive statements, but theological statements. Regarding heaven, I don't think you can tell what the grass is going to be like or what kind of clothes, if any, we're going to wear or what the cuisine will be like. But you can say things that are theological. You can say heaven will be the fulfillment of what we were meant to be. You can say we will know God in ways we do not know God now. You can say God's will be done in ways it is not now. And by the way, for me, that's the most important thing, God's will being accomplished or God's purposes being accomplished. So where does this leave us? I don't think we need to be too literally minded. I think that poetry is fine. I think fantasy is fine. I think myths are fine. I think listening to the stories people tell at their deathbeds and from near-death experiences are worth thinking about and pondering, trying to understand. My favorite picture of heaven is actually from a novel by C.S. Lewis called The Great Divorce. And it's about a bus trip that somebody in hell takes and goes to heaven. I like it so much because it's fiction. It's a novel. I think it's a really profound book, but you can't take it literally. So I think we are free to imagine as long as the imagination stands within this theological notion that God's will should be done or will be done or must be done. And here's my final word. Then I guess if there are questions, I'll take any. I think we really are, at the end of the day, pretty much like a child in its mother's womb about to be born. The child in the womb really can't comprehend the world into which it is about to be born. And I think we're probably in the same state. Maybe we can tell stories and write poems, and the infant can't do that, but we probably don't really have any good prosaic idea of what lies ahead. Okay, now with that, I am going to stop and see if there are any questions. Oh.
Hello, I'm Brenda, and my husband always imagined heaven as a wonderful, beautiful golf course because he loved golf and he loved being on the golf course. So, and I don't imagine it that way. So I guess in our imaginations, we do imagine heaven as being something that we would be pleased at.
Yeah, well, certainly, I have all sorts of ideas about my personal heaven. I mean, I'd like to play basketball every afternoon, and I'd like to play poker on Friday nights. I'd like to get together for a big family, extended family dinner on Sunday. I have an idea what kind of church service I'd like to go to, and so on. But I know this is all my imagination. On the other hand, I actually think it's worthwhile to engage our imagination and think about these subjects. And again, as long as it stands within uh, the divine will, I think it's just fine.
Hey, my name's McNair. I was wondering about the city of Jerusalem, the last picture you sort of had. Do you have a connection with possibly Paul trying to convince other Jews to believe in Christianity due to the connection of the Messiah being sort of the new King of David, sort of that not happening, maybe giving them a new idea of what the new kingdom of the Jews will be in the afterlife? Do you think there's a connection to that? And also in Revelation, I forget who wrote that. Just another way to sort of give them an idea of what the kingdom of heaven would be.
Okay, so first of all, the microphone was a little fuzzy there. I'm not sure this is going to be on target or not, but if I heard most of your question, I think part of what's going on in early Christianity is this. I think almost everybody thought that when the Messiah would come, there would be a Jewish kingdom, and that the 12 tribes, the lost tribes, would come back, and that the king of Israel would in effect rule the world, and God would rule the world through the king. And what happens in early Christianity is the Messiah has come, and that didn't happen. So early Christians have to rethink things. They have to rethink things and figure out what it means, for example, that the Son of David has been exalted to heaven and reigns from heaven, but doesn't reign on earth the way everybody expected. And this was, in fact, an objection that people who did not accept Jesus, Jewish people who did not accept Jesus, made back then. And it's still an objection you hear from Jewish people today. When the Messiah comes, X, Y, and Z will happen. When Jesus came, X, Y, and Z did not happen. Therefore, he is not the Messiah. And so the evangelists and apologists from the earliest times, and that would include Paul, are trying to wrestle with this. They're trying to reinterpret the scripture. They are trying to understand. And at some point, the truth is that Christianity becomes far more interested in heaven now, heaven in the afterlife, than what we call the last things like the Messiah reigning in Jerusalem and the resurrection of the dead and so on. Anyway, that's getting very complicated. Maybe that sort of approached an answer to your question, but I'm having trouble with the microphone getting everything.
Hi, Mary Lou here. I'm real interested in your analogy of the heaven, entrance into heaven being similar to a newborn child after birth. The only thing that bothers me is when after that first breath is taken, is a horrified scream. I like to think of delight being at the end of the tunnel, not horror or fear.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the things that must happen to infants when they come out of the dark womb is they're overwhelmed by the bright light, right? So you might argue that that's similar too. On the other hand, you know, I'm an optimist, and I believe God is madly in love with all of us. But I also think that we all need to be remade and repaired, and that probably will not always be an easy process. So I expect some. I expect not everything is just total bliss from the second we die. I think we all have business we will need to attend to and things we will need to process and so on. I was told I needed to stop at 10:20. It's now 10:22. So I'm going to thank you all for your attention. I thank you for your indulgence. I know Zoom is not the ideal, and I look forward to being there in person in a little bit because I much prefer that. Anyway, thanks for your attention today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Dale. Good to be with you.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye. Thanks. We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.